Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us for today's event, The Great Debate. My name is Lauren Wakefield and I'm the Marketing and Industry Programmes Director at IAB Europe and have the pleasure of being your host today. So on Tuesday, we kicked off our first event in our Trust and Transparency series. And today we have our headline event, The Great Debate. So over the next few weeks, we'll be hosting a few more virtual events to discuss and debate trust and transparency in the digital advertising industry. We hope to tackle all of the big industry conversations, so everything from mis and disinformation to quality, sustainability and more. So this is actually the second time we've run this series. We actually started it back in September last year, and it was a huge success. We had some great conversations, so we really wanted to continue that again this year. But today we've got a stellar lineup of speakers, moderators and panelists covering a multiple number of sessions. First up, we'll be hearing from Tim Elkington, who's the Chief Digital Officer at IAB UK. He's going to present an overview of IAB Europe's Pan-European Buyers Quality Survey results. Tim will then be joined by a panel of experts to discuss these results in a little more detail. Following this, we'll then enjoy a panel discussion looking at disinformation and how we can tackle it in the digital advertising industry. We'll also have a keynote from our Chief Economist, Daniel Knapp, around the topic of sustainability and the supply chain. And finally, we'll end with a keynote on a presentation from IAB Europe's Technical Director, Alexandra. He's going to just go through some new standards with us all. So it's going to be a really fascinating couple of hours, and we're really happy to have you all joining us for it. We're very grateful for all of our experts that are going to be taking the time out today to share their knowledge and expertise. Every speaker is actually a member of IAB Europe, so if you would like more information on how to get involved with future activities, please do contact myself or our CMO Helen Masada. We'll be happy to share further details with you. You can also actively participate in today's event, as each panel will be followed by an audience Q&A. So if you do have questions for today's panelists, do make sure you add them to the Q&A box that you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get as many of those over to our speakers for you as we can. But without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Tim to kick off our first session and look at IAB Europe's Pan-European Buyers Quality Survey. So Tim, I'm just going to hand over to you.
That's amazing. Thank you for that, Lauren, and thank you very much for giving me the time to talk about this today. Very elegantly, I'm going to ask you to flick on to the next slide, please. So yeah, so this was a survey that we did, and I think one of the really good things about it was it's a genuine pan-European survey. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to, as it says on the screen, understand brand and agency attitudes towards the key challenges they faced in terms of obstacles for spending money online, stuff that they were concerned about. Have a look at some quality standards, people's attitudes towards things that the IABs were doing in different countries, and to sort of try to get under the skin a little bit of the drivers of buying digital advertising. So as I said, we were really lucky in that we got 119 responses, but from 20 different European countries, which I think gives it a really good, proper pan-European aspect. And two things we were able to do, which I'll pull out a little bit in some of the data today, was we were able to compare attitudes between agencies and brands, and also attitudes in those countries that already had a sort of quality scheme, for example, the IAB UK Gold Standard, the Quality in Poland, etc., and those in countries that didn't have a sort of existing scheme. And the balance between those, as it says on screen, was quite near to 50-50. So we're able to draw some sort of quite interesting comparisons. And in the next sort of 15 minutes or so, I'll just go over some of the basic results and draw out a couple of things that I thought were particularly interesting. And then, as Lauren says, we'll have a panel discussion. So if you could click on a couple of slides, please, Lauren. So yeah, so the first thing is all really about the stuff that people are concerned about. And in the survey, we asked people, when buying digital advertising, how concerned are you about the following 5 challenges? And the reason that we picked these 5 challenges is that these are the 5 that are included in all the existing sort of quality schemes, so whether it's UK, Germany, France, Poland, etc. The gold standard, for example, includes brand safety, ad fraud, privacy, compliance and user experience, but not viewability. And for some of the other studies, it's a little bit different. But anyway, you can see in terms of the buyers, their level of concern about these sort of different factors. And actually, if you added together very concerned and concerned, the lowest was ad fraud at 75%, and the highest was viewability at 89%. But in terms of the percentages of people that say they're very concerned, you can see that two sort of stick out, brand safety at 47%, and then viewability at 51%. So of the kind of big five challenges, those are probably the two that sort of spike the most concern. And if you move on to the next slide, please. So a really good example is we can contrast the attitudes of brands and agencies. So this is the percentage in each case who said they were either very concerned about brand safety or very concerned about viewability. And all the way through this, you start to sort of tease out slightly different attitudes amongst agencies and amongst brands. So you can see 61% of brands said that they were very concerned about brand safety, compared to just under 40% of agencies. And thinking about this a little bit, I suppose it makes sense. You know, agencies want to do the best job for their clients that they possibly can, so they're going to be concerned about brand safety. But if you're a brand, actually, you know, it's your own organization that brand safety issues could do damage to. It's, you know, your reputation, your job, the reputation of your organization. So it kind of makes sense that you'll be even more concerned than your agency partner about possible brand safety risks. And it's a similar thing for viewability. If you're a brand, you know, you want to make sure in particular that the ads you're serving are actually being properly viewed by people. So the viewability concern tends to be higher than it is amongst agencies. And if you whiz on to the next slide, please. And so this is the first time where we'll actually contrast countries that do have a scheme against countries that don't. So you can see the countries that have a sort of existing quality scheme: UK, France, Poland, Germany, Sweden, Ireland and Italy. And then there's a whole bunch of countries that participated in the study that don't yet have an existing quality scheme. And the thing that's interesting is that actually people tend to be more concerned in a country that has something like the gold standard. And I think there's, you know, it's really difficult to sort of unpick the cause and effect. That, you know, you could say that maybe if an IAB is talking a lot about challenges and has something to tackle those challenges, then one of the side effects of that is it actually raises awareness of some of the concerns in the market. But I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, because those concerns they exist, and the more we talk about them, the more people understand them, the better place we are to cope with them. But you know, there is a sort of, there's a contrast between countries that do have a sort of quality scheme and those that don't. So those are the sort of very basic results. And what I wanted to do now is to go a little bit further and unpick some of those sort of attitudes a bit further. So if you click on a couple of slides, please. So the next sort of 3 or 4 slides are all about agree and disagree statements. And we asked a sort of variety of stuff in here, which hopefully for media owners is relatively encouraging. So just to go through these very briefly, 97% actually agreed that buying inventory in a quality media environment was important to them. And 84% agreed that they were willing to pay a premium for higher quality, premium trusted inventory. So the really interesting thing about that is a conversation I quite often have with media owners is what's the connection between what people say they do and what they actually do. So in theory, attitudes are really positive towards paying a premium for that quality inventory. But does this actually translate into action and a change in behaviour, which is one of the things that's sort of worth exploring a bit more. And then finally on this slide, there is, you know, slightly under half of people do actually agree that buying inventory as low cost as possible is important to me. So yes, people are concerned, you know, they want to favour the premium inventory, but there's also a significant proportion of people out there who are happy to buy it as cheap as they possibly can. And if you was on to the next slide, please. So again, this sort of backs up some of the stuff on the previous slide, where we've got 92% say they prefer spending their advertising budget with suppliers that adhere to industry standards. And that's a very general point about industry standards. You know, it's not necessarily an IAB scheme, could be TAG, could be something else, but 92% prefer spending with a supplier that adheres to industry standards. There's a relatively high level of awareness, 90.8%, so that they're aware of IAB advertising standards. And really encouragingly, 73% say that they check if a media owner or supplier adheres to industry standards before spending budget with them. And then finally, the flip side of that, we do have roughly 1 in 5 people who say, look, I don't mind about industry standards. I'm happy to spend my digital advertising budget you know, wherever I can get a positive ROI for my brand or product. And let's just go into that a little bit further. So the next slide, please. So this is where, again, you get, there's a couple of interesting things to pull out. There's a difference between brands and agencies. So in the first one, agencies are more likely to agree with the statement, buying inventory at a low cost is important to me. Much more likely to agree with that than brands, 55% versus 43%. Again, brands, you know, you're thinking about your own reputation, you're thinking about the environment that you want to appear in. From an agency point of view, you know, you might be under a lot of pressure from clients to get campaigns away, to make sure you achieve that reach. So possibly they're not quite as concerned about that. And actually, it's a similar story with the other graph, where we say that concerns about digital advertising have discouraged me from spending more of my budget in digital. So agencies, you know, quite a pragmatic view, we've got to get this campaign away, we've got targets to hit, we've got reach figures to achieve, whereas brands are a little more cautious when it comes to some of those challenges preventing them spending. And then the next slide, please. So for me, this, you know, if I had to pull out one thing to remember, I think probably it's the figures on this slide. So here we're contrasting markets that have a quality scheme, such as the UK, France, Poland, Germany, Sweden, Ireland, and Italy, with the other countries that don't yet have a quality scheme in place. And what you see is a sort of difference in attitudes. And I want to pull out the second chart on this slide in particular. So this is the percentage of people that agree with the statement, I don't mind about industry standards. I'm happy to spend my digital advertising budget anywhere where I can achieve a positive ROI for my brand or products. And what you find is in a market that doesn't have a national quality scheme, people are 5 times more likely to agree with that statement. So even in a sample of sort of 120 people or so, I think that's sort of relatively significant. In countries that have introduced a quality scheme, only 6% will agree with that statement. I don't mind about industry advertising standards, whereas that leaps to 32% when you've got a market without a scheme. So I think the conclusion that I draw from that is that being vocal about how you are solving those issues and how you're asking people to adhere to standards can change attitudes in markets, which I regard as really positive. So there's just sort of one more slide to show in terms of new areas, and then just a sort of couple of conclusions. So if you could just bump it on a couple of slides, please, Lauren. So this was an interesting question for everyone. So we said, look, you know, we know that we're dealing with, you know, viewability, brand safety, etc. Mostly those standards are relevant for sort of programmatic display advertising, but we're really aware of a range of new formats that are coming up. So we said, of these new formats, of these news channels, on a scale of 1 to 5, how important do you think it is to develop standards in each of these new areas? And again, the spread is sort of, you know, it's a relatively sort of thin spread from 2.7 to 3.4. But the area that people were most interested in us developing new standards in was connected TV. And that really resonates with the conversations that I have. So people talk about connected TV being a really big opportunity. And actually, you know, there's quite a lot going on in there, quite a few challenges, maybe particular in relation to ad fraud. And so actually connected TV was top of people's list when it came to developing new standards. So those are all the slides. The full version is able to download on the IAB Europe website. And if you just click on a couple more, please, Lauren, to the summary, it's really interesting to note that brand safety and viewability are currently the most important issues faced, which I think is a really interesting sort of sense check. The good news about buyers is that according to the data from this survey, they do value buying media in a quality environment, and in theory, they are happy to pay a premium for that. And reassuring to know that actually about 3/4 of them will check to see if a supplier, adheres to industry standards before committing budget. And finally, just sort of recapping on that last thing I showed, where the percentage of people who agree with the statement, I don't mind about industry standards, is much, much lower, 6% in those markets that have an industry standard compared to 32% in those markets that don't. So, having an industry standard, encouraging people to participate does appear to change sort of buyer attitudes. So that's just a very quick sort of run through the survey. There is a full version that you can download with a bit more detail on the IAB Europe site. Lauren, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's wonderful. It's great to hear and go through those stats there. And actually, I'm very delighted now that we've got a panel of experts joining us who are going to hopefully dive into some of those results and findings in a little bit more detail. So hopefully we've got everybody starting to join us now, and we've got Reyes, who's Director of IAB Spain, who's going to be moderating this session. She's going to be joined by Simon Harris, Director Advertising Strategy at DPG Media, as well as Tanya, Director of International Growth at Show Heroes Group, and then obviously Tim will keep you where you are to join the session as well. Reyes, have I got you there and I can hand over to you? I think we're just gradually letting everybody into the room. Morning, Tanya. Morning, Simon. Nice to see you again.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you too, and thanks for having us over.
No problem. I think we're just waiting for Reyes, and then you should be good to go. I can see that Reyes is here on the screen now. So, Reyes, good morning, good afternoon. Happy to hand the session over to you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. So, hi everyone. Thank you for being here today. And after Tim's really interesting presentation, and I think there can be some questions coming from the audience, but also some questions from the experts that I'm gonna try to presume and put into the super extraordinary panel that we have today. So welcome Tim, Tanya and Simon. So, I mean, hearing what Simon has been sharing, what a statement or finding has resonated with you most, Tanya and Simon? Because I think Tim has given some kind of clues about what has really resonated more with him, but what are your thinkings? What are your thoughts? Whoever wants to start.
Ladies first.
Simon?
All right, I can jump in. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Reyes and Tim for the opportunity. And I definitely feel that it's a very important topic that we're discussing today. The one point that resonated the most with me is that 84% of all the buyers that you surveyed said that they're willing to pay that extra premium. And as someone who's had the experience of working on the media owner as well as the brand side, I can safely say that this is one of the key points that I always, contest about. And I always tell brands that you might find a cheap inventory somewhere, but if you're looking for high quality, good inventory, which matches all the industry standards that Tim spoke of, you have to pay that premium. And in a good way, it kind of resonated with me, that 84%.
Simon?
Yeah, I work for one of the DPG Media now, which is one of the largest premium publishers in Europe. We do around €2 billion a year in revenue and employ around 5,000 people. So kind of, so it was great to see from the research that nearly all buyers view media quality as important. Great to see as well, of course, that the majority are willing to pay a premium for quality inventory. You know, of course, price is still important for many, especially at the moment, given the kind of pressures in the market. But, you know, regardless of that, as a large publisher, that definitely lifts my spirits. But there's some surprises in there as well, right? I think the big finding around brand safety and viewability still being a huge concern surprised me a little bit as someone who, prior to working on the sales side, worked, you know, at 3 of the kind of big holding co's leading trading operations for kind of over a decade. The fact that that's still an issue for many buyers perhaps suggests that, you know, some of the solutions that are available are underdeployed. So, you know, some great positives, but also some kind of surprising concerns.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question about the surprises in the research. So, Tim, if you want also to comment on, I mean, you have already said some of that, but in terms of surprise, it really comes to a surprise, or you have already had any kind of research or knowledge about that during your experience?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the fact that the viewability figure was so high was a surprise to me, particularly because I think roughly a quarter of the respondents were from the UK. And the reason we don't include viewability in the gold standard in the UK is because it just hasn't been like a particularly big issue for us over the last couple of years. So I think sort of people take it for granted that their campaigns will achieve a certain level of viewability and that everyone is adhering to the standard. So if I'd had to write the results without seeing them, I would have written that viewability figure much lower. So it's a sort of, it's just a useful reminder that actually it is still a really significant thing and that it is really important to buyers, and it's not something that we can kind of take for granted. So that was probably the thing that surprised me. And I think, as I said earlier on, if you look at the other quality standards across Europe, I think it's included in all of the others. So that's, you know, I think that's positive, so that, you know, we are asking people to adhere to viewability standards. But it was certainly a surprise to me that that was high. And, you know, along with brand safety, which again, when we first started the gold standard 2017, 2018 was the biggest issue in the industry, you know, absolutely dominating everything. We appear to have got a handle on that over the last couple of years, but it's a useful reminder that we certainly shouldn't be complacent about that.
Yeah. And so coming to this viewability and also on the brand safety, because yeah, the brand safety thing, it looks like with all the efforts that the industry is doing to ensure that we have better brand safety, it's keep on coming on the high level. So Tanya, from your point of view about these two issues, so brand safety and viewability, what do you think? What do you feel with this research we haven't seen with the results?
No, I totally agree with what Tim said. Like, I work across multiple markets, and Show Heroes is present across, like, I think 21 countries in total. And I've been one of the key drivers of that growth. When I joined, it was just a one country unit. And now I've literally been involved with every market expansion there has been. And with that, I've had the experience that, you know, on the one hand, what Tim said, that, you know, if I work with the UK market or a US market, the fact that viewability will be low doesn't even occur to me, because it's just like, it's an obvious thing. But also having worked with markets like Austria or Netherlands or Belgium or other countries in Europe, really, where the inventory size or the market size is fairly small, I've had really intense discussions, and I've worked on both advertiser and publisher side. So I can safely say that the publishers sometimes their interest might not always be aligned with the media owner versus the advertiser, and the key really lies in making sure that everyone's aligned and meeting the industry benchmarks. Because I've had these discussions where in certain markets where a specific provider, let's say Switzerland, has a limited amount of inventory, and they're just focusing on filling that inventory and whoever's ready to buy that inventory. Now, whether that inventory comes at 50% viewability or whether that comes at 70% viewability, it's the luck of the advertiser and the work of the publisher as well as the media owner. Whereas on the other hand, I have like clients in the US and UK where, and publishers in that space, where 70-80% is the minimum guaranteed, and without which you'll obviously be taken off a media plan. So personally, I feel that I've been very lucky at Show Heroes that one of the few things that I've not had to deal with is brand safety, because of the nature of the work that Show Heroes does. We're like 99% brand safe across all IIS, Double Verify, all sorts of providers. But at the same time, I've seen discrepancies in viewability across the globe, regardless of what the media owner can do or what the advertiser wants versus what the publisher is offering, basically.
Yeah. So if we move into other areas that really were kind of the buyers taking into account, they were talking about development of standards, and CTV, and this is, I guess, no surprise for anyone, came out on top of closely followed then by audio and digital out of home. So if we focus on CTV now, what's happening there? I mean, what else needs to be done, as this is looking as some of the key focus for advertisers, and then also then for the agencies. So Simon, if you want to get this one first.
Sure, yeah, it's definitely an important one for us, because obviously DPG Media owns VTM Go, which is one of the largest streaming services in Belgium, and also RTL in that market through a joint venture with Roussel. So like a sort of area very close to my heart. I think it's fair to say that in Europe, connected TV is still very much in the ascendancy, right? We're very much tracking behind the maturity that you already see available in the US. It's not to say it's a small market, but just the market's not as developed as it is, you know, across the pond. I think the IAB Tech Lab's been great, actually, especially recently, at developing standards based on learnings from the US. And in a way, that means that European broadcasters are going to benefit from being fast followers, for want of a better term. You know, the IAB Tech Lab recently introduced updated standards for OpenRTB, version called 2.6. And in the context of CTV, 2.6 is going to help publishers and advertisers alike. From a selfish perspective, you know, one great feature for publishers for CTV is price per second floors. That allows sellers like DPG Media to set a floor rate for each second an ad runs. And that makes sure really that a broadcaster is going to receive the best possible price for their inventory, because of course we don't want to sell, for the same floor price for a 15, a 30 or a 60-second ad slot. And that might not seem important at the moment, right? As I said, the European market's not as mature as it is in the US, and a lot of inventory is still sold direct or through programmatic guaranteed. But I think it's really going to stand the industry in good stead as more inventory becomes available through the open marketplace, as the kind of general market grows, not just in our markets, but across the whole of Western Europe. So I think we're definitely going to benefit from a lot of the good work that's happening in the US through the kind of tech lab.
Yeah, and Tanya, as you're managing many countries, how do you see that? How are developing in these countries, and what we need to do? I mean, clearly the standards that the IAB Tech Lab has developed, but anything else, something that you feel or you see in the markets there?
Absolutely. So I totally agree with Simon that we're falling behind when it comes to, as Europe, we're falling behind versus the US. I see a lot more progress in the US market when it comes to the CTV landscape, a lot more options, a lot more like possibilities that a provider basically has as a media owner or a CTV owner. In Europe, I feel that it still needs like a lot of growth. I think countries like Germany, Italy, Spain, UK, let's say EU top 5, so to say, are pretty strong in the CTV space, but Eastern Europe's not. Eastern Europe is still growing. You will struggle to find the right inventory at the right price for the right audience and things like that. That's one of the key challenges. And honestly speaking, there are so many CTV providers coming up now. Like I feel CTV is where online video was maybe in 2010 or 2008 or something like that. So there's a lot of room for growth. There's no viewability tracking on CTV, which is important. I mean, of course, there's a certain logic behind that when you're sitting and watching a TV and when the ad is being served, it's 100% viewable. which is correct. But then from an advertiser's perspective, I've spoken to multiple buyers who need to be convinced of this fact. Like they're like, okay, I can track this on online video. Why can't I track this on CTV? It's all about education. So that's one. The other element I feel about CTV that's key is targeting, right? Of course, at the moment, you can target by publisher, you can target by channels for that matter. You can maybe go ahead and add some extra overlays. But I was having this very interesting discussion with the global client just recently, where they wanted to apply keywords on CTV. And if you think about it, CTV doesn't have any keywords. And then how do you go ahead and tap into a certain audience set? That's why I think companies like Show Heroes and a couple of others that exist in the CTV space are doing a good job in developing something called a semantic technology, semantic matching, which understands the content and the emotion behind the content, and tries to deliver the ad in a similar environment or for a similar emotion or a similar audience for that matter. So there's a lot of room for growth in terms of targeting, in terms of availability, in terms of pricing as well. Then when a provider, whichever that might be, comes up to a media owner and says, hey, my price is X euros. And then on top of that, media owner needs to add, let's say, €1 on top or €2 to make their margin. And then the advertiser's like, but why is this €2 more expensive, without really understanding the full landscape? So that's been a challenge. There's definitely room for growth and education in this space.
Yeah. And Tim, what are your feelings here?
Yeah, so I think the fact that people are most interested in developing standards in CTV when we compare it to the other things we asked about, I think that just reflects the size of the opportunity within connected TV. So I think there's a lot of buzz, there's a lot of excitement about it. And the conversations we're having, so just sort of speaking from a personal experience, when we developed the gold standard, we were very much thinking about sort of programmatic display. And so we have quite a few people that come to us and say, look, I'm in audio, we do gaming advertising, we do connected TV. We'd love to adhere to industry standards, but actually the stuff that you've developed makes it a little bit hard for us. It isn't necessarily appropriate for exactly what we're doing. So one of the things that we are doing in the UK is to try to broaden some of the gold standard criteria that we have, so we are able to kind of accommodate people within connected TV, within audio, etc. Because the feedback that I get sort of every day is actually, we're really keen, we want to show the industry that we can do the right thing and that this market is maturing, and as it grows, we'll adhere to standards. And I suppose it's our job just to make sure that we kind of accommodate those wishes so we can bring increased industry standards to connected TV, for example.
Yeah, and then it was also audio and digital out of home. So I mean, at the end of the day, it's also this you were commenting big opportunities for the market that really the buyers are keen to go into them, but they need some securities. Something you would like to add in this sense about audio and digital out of home, because there were also in the results of the research. I don't know, any one of you. Anything that you will add to that?
Yeah, I think as Tim said, there's a massive opportunity, right, in audio and video. The markets are pretty nascent at the moment, and standards are being established. But I think what's interesting as well is, we think of standards in display as something that's static, but of course there's standards now that we're seeing kind of come through around brand suitability is a really good example, right? Lots of buyers concerned still about brand safety, but GARM obviously now have a kind of framework for having some really nuanced debates around that. Something we've rolled out free of charge across all of our private auction deals. So like the kind of standards for audio and video are very nascent, but I think it's a mistake to think about the standards for display as something that's static and fixed in time now, right? That's a work in progress as well. So I think it's what keeps the industry interesting, right? The fact that it's not just audio and video that are kind of developing and coming through, and we're being fast followers there. Also, the market for display and native is changing a lot as well, and becoming meaningfully better for buyers as well. So that that's what kind of gets me up in the morning.
Mm-hmm. We have a question coming from the audience that I think. You guys that has also expertise in the US market, Tanya, for example, they're asking about the increasing action under the VPPA, the Video Privacy Protection Act, which prohibits the sharing of PII with audiovisual viewing in the US hamper. US growth, make the US growth in the CTV space, something that I really was not aware. I don't know if you know it, or is something absolutely new for you, Tanya.
I've definitely heard about it, and that's definitely been in discussion, at least within Show Heroes, especially looking at the US landscape. And personally, I do agree that it would hamper the growth in the short run, because obviously everyone's trying to adapt, everyone's trying to understand what this means for them, what can be shared, what can't be shared, what's the extent to which, is it US publishers only, limited to the US? Things are being chalked out right now. It's not 100% guaranteed just yet, like what this law would entail and the scope of the whole setup. Having said that, I don't think that this is a deal breaker. In our entire online video industry, for that matter, we face so many different changes and challenges. Like, for example, this cookies going away. It's been in discussions for eternity, and at the same time, people do find a way or come up with like a solution around it. So we are discussing a bunch of options that would tackle this problem. So I don't think this would hamper the growth in the long run. In the next 3 to 6 months, maybe, but then it's not going to kill the CTV space.
Okay, thank you for that. So finally, and I think we are very well on time, so we can take any other questions from the audience. But if we see from an IAB point of view, that 90% of the respondents say they were aware of IAB advertising standards, which is great for IAB, and I think it talks high of the work of the team have been doing there. But as always, we want the best, and we want to reach this extra 10% that we haven't been able to reach so far. So what ideas you can give us, what further things we can do to educate the buyers? Simon, from your point of view.
Yeah, so actually I think the IAB as a group of organizations does very well already. I think that 90% should definitely be seen as a success, always kind of glass very half full. I think as for the other 10%, standards aren't always going to be front of mind for everyone, right? If you're a direct response buyer running cost per install campaigns, standards might not be front of mind. If you're an agency planner, standards may not be, what's in the latest OpenRTB spec that we talked about earlier in the context of CTV might not be front of mind. I think the IAB does a great job at a local level, educating the industry. I think the IAB Europe does a fantastic job with research, and I'm not just saying that. I think it's also great to see that being pushed out through social channels. I think that should help things as well, right? Because that's how a lot of the, planners and buyers that are kind of coming through at the moment consume a lot of their kind of information and research these days. And we talked about the Tech Lab obviously establishing standards and how invaluable that is. So really, I would see the 90% as a massive success rather than seeing the 10% as a failure. I think it's a pretty good job, to be fair.
Thank you. Thank you in the name of all the people that are working on that. And Tanya, what are your thoughts on this?
Totally agree with Simon on that. Like, I don't think that it would be fair. I mean, I totally agree that IAB is doing a great job. I've been a big fan of IAB ever since I started working in advertising over 10 years ago. So every time I think of a situation where I deal with people who don't necessarily know much about the programmatic space or just the online digital space, but they're still working in the area, I always go ahead and I offer like a consultative approach. And the brands that I work with, it's not about like the short-term wins. It's not about like, hey, why don't you know this? It's more about how can I educate you? Maybe doing road shows, like events. And Show Heroes does this free of charge. Like it's we have a programmatic force. I'm one of the ambassadors of the force, like actually going and educating people, like why should you do a certain thing and why should you not? When we were speaking about viewability, one of the key things that advertisers tend to do is actually apply viewability benchmarks on the DSP side of things, which is not necessarily the best idea. Like, yes, the thought is correct that I want to reach a certain benchmark, but it might backfire. And, sometimes you have like this disconnect between the DSP and the SSP and the media provider for that matter. So you've set a 70% benchmark, you've set certain content labels and whatnot that you want to reach. let's say on Google, which might not be in tandem with, let's say, a Trade Desk or a Smart Ad Server or a Xandr, which are completely different systems and completely differently defined. And hence, you might not end up tapping into your right audience or maximize the potential, basically. So the whole idea should be, go on these road shows, educate people, let them know what you know based off your experience, and hopefully these 10% of the population would also come around. And if not, then as Simon said, you can't really educate everyone. Maybe some people are in this for the short run. So the whole idea is to make people aware as much as possible with whatever activities you can undertake as a consultative approach.
Thank you, Tanya. And Tim, from the inside perspective, what do you think we should be doing better or start to do?
Yeah, thank you, Reyes. So it's an interesting one. So I definitely appreciate Simon and Tanya's support and enthusiasm for the IAB, which is brilliant. It's worth saying that the way that we got the sample for the survey was that national IABs emailed advertisers that were registered with their sort of database. So say, for example, I don't know, we've got sort of 5,000-6,000 members that we email every week at IAB UK. And a subsection of those are brands and agencies. So they would have received an invitation to complete the survey. So to some extent, we were surveying people that already had a relationship with the IAB. So I would expect that figure to be pretty high. If you did another survey, which obviously would be really costly, and you look for a representative sample across 20 European countries of brands and agencies, I would expect that figure to be a bit lower, because to some extent we're already asking people that were engaged with the IAB. So from my point of view, yes, the 90% figure is brilliant, but we still have more work to do. So, I'd love that figure to be 100 amongst people that knew the IAB already. And I think one of the interesting questions for the industry is, when you're talking about standards, how much carrot do you use and how much sort of stick? So how much do you say, look, this is brilliant because, if you're dealing with a company, a supplier that adheres to standards, you're going to get a high quality guaranteed experience? Or do you want to say, wow, if you're buying on the open web and you don't know where your ad's going, then, there are risks associated with that. And, which of those two mechanisms is best at encouraging people to sort of embrace industry standards and to increase awareness? So that's that's a constant thing that we talk about. But yes, the 90% figure is high, but we've still got more work to do.
Yeah, definitely, I agree with you. So we are coming to the end of the panel. So anything you want to add, something that you think we haven't touched on, it's interesting, go ahead, please. Simon, Tanya, Tim.
Yes, do you know, I'll go first, because I thought Simon made a really good point about brand safety and brand suitability. So I think probably, brand safety means something different in 2022 than it meant in 2017. For example, when we had the front page of the Times in the UK about advertisers appearing on jihadi videos, then it was a very sort of black and white, we don't want to be by this content because it isn't brand safe. And now with lots of editorial coverage on COVID and so forth, I think people are very sort of sensitive, and it's as much about suitability as it is about that sort of black and white safety. So I suppose the important thing is, as an industry, we develop and, we listen to those sort of more nuanced arguments, and we're able to think about brand safety in a different way than the way that we might have thought about it sort of 5 years or so.
Yeah, for sure. It's actually one of the things that surprised me most about this kind of study was that, probably a decade since, verification tools first became widespread, that buyers are still kind of concerned over those kind of same old issues. So, being seen in non-safe environments and just viewability in general. So that to me suggests to a degree that buyers perhaps aren't getting the surety that they need from third-party ad tech. Which means that perhaps it's time to adopt, simpler, albeit more time-consuming techniques. Actually, that's indeed what the government did when they had some issues with brand safety on YouTube way back when. So, you know, a good inclusion list and a well thought out kind of keyword block list that doesn't overblock, because of course that's a problem these days as well, right? One of the things that you mentioned actually, Tim, there was GARM and brand suitability. That's something that we've started offering for free on all of our private auction deals. And the benefit of doing it publisher side, of course, is we built a tool that categorizes all of our content, works in front of and behind a paywall, works across web and app, and all of our content's categorized as opposed to some of the web's content, which is sometimes a problem and where things slip through the net with kind of third-party ad tech. So I think it's a combination in terms of managing brand suitability well, between doing the, you know, the basics well, inclusion lists, well thought out block lists, and perhaps, you know, what's new is old, working slightly closer with publishers again around things like brand suitability, where those tools exist. It's you know, it's doable now, and yeah, as I said, a good example of you know, the movable feast that's our industry. Things are constantly evolving, whether that's standards for CTV or display and native.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Simon.
Just one thing to add to that, totally agree with what Tim and Simon said. However, also there would be a definite need to leave some room for adjustments, because I personally had clients during COVID times who were completely shying away from the topic. But on the other hand, like the way Show Heroes works is that it builds out content based on the campaign that's running, very tailored to the campaign. And I actually had requests coming in saying, hey, we want to be shown around COVID related content pieces. That kind of course, it was not a great time for the entire world, but in general, there were a lot of people searching for like how to keep themselves safe from the whole, you know, situation. And I actually had some advertisers who came up to me and they said, you know, they were like disinfectant advertisers, or like, you know, advertisers that were tech related, and they were actually, you know, and focusing on audiences that are looking or searching for the right equipment for their home. So it's just a matter of, like, I would say 90% of the times the brand safety guidelines that we will set up in like across the industry would work, but maybe like 10% of the times there would be need to tweak that based on the situation, based on the setup.
Yeah, I think that's one thing the kind of Global Alliance for Responsible Media has got really right. You have kind of low, moderate, and high risk. So it allows for a much more nuanced conversation there. I think the brand safety side of the kind of survey was interesting. Viewability as well. Also kind of interesting. I guess that, you know, as a kind of publisher, we see pretty strong viewability across the board. So it's not something we're really concerned about. You know, we have well-designed environments, they're uncluttered, we use technical solutions like lazy loading. But I think what's more interesting than sort of the viewability as a percentage, which sometimes can feel a little bit kind of meaningless, is the drive that we're seeing in the market, and a big demand for the managed services that my team runs around transacting on viewable CPMs, which feels like a lot more meaningful. But also a lot of our larger advertisers, I won't name here, but, you know, really driving towards much more meaningful types of measurements. So, you know, running kind of brand lift studies on all of their large campaigns now that really kind of get to what matters, right? Kind of advertisers rightly want to, you know, get the best bang for their buck, especially kind of at the moment when the market's fairly tough, and ensuring kind of ads are seen as a starting point, but really kind of getting to measuring what matters, whether that's kind of a lift in awareness, favorability, or even purchase intent. So that's the other kind of trend alongside transacting on a viewable CPM that we're seeing there. And I think the good thing about that, right, is you're measuring what, or our advertising partners are measuring what matters, but also they're using tools that use things like local storage rather than third-party cookies. So not only are they kind of getting to what really counts beyond the kind of percentage viewability, but they're also kind of taking those first steps to kind of future-proof their measurement as kind of the privacy sandbox rolls out. And over the next kind of couple of years, we see the kind of third-party cookie kind of disappearing in Chrome at last. So yeah, I think that's a kind of interesting trend, like viewable CPMs as opposed to percentage viewabilities, kind of buying on media outcomes and then measuring kind of what matters. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how and if standards there develop as well.
Thank you, Simon. I'm seeing, Lauren, this is for you ladies. Will this session be available for watch? So it's being recorded where they can find it?
Yes, definitely. So we're recording the whole event today, and we'll be sharing a wrap up in the kind of coming days where everyone will be able to access the individual sessions on demand. So yeah, the content will be available beyond the event today.
That's great. Thank you so much. So I think we are done. Thank you, Simon, Tanya, Tim. Thanks a lot. And over to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Reyes, for leading the conversation there, and Tim for diving through the results with us before, and also to everyone for joining us as well on that panel. Really interesting conversation. As Tim did mention, the survey results are available on IAB Europe's website. So if you do want to access those, just head over to the website, into our Knowledge Hub, and you should be able to find them there. But next up, we have an interesting conversation around tackling disinformation in the digital advertising industry. I think our panelists are just joining us now. But for this session, we're going to have David Goddard, who is the VP Business Development at Double Verify. He's going to lead us through what disinformation is, how it has grown, and what can be done by the industry to help curb the spread. He's going to be joined by Inez from IAB Europe, along with Chris Kleinsmith, who's the head of platform sales, Samsung Ads, Claire Ritchie, who is the head of programmatic at Mediacom, and Justin, who is director marketplace quality at MediaMath. Don't forget, you can submit any questions you've got for our panelists in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So David will hopefully get through to as many of those as possible during the session. But David, I can see you're there, so I'm happy to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining today's panel and session. My name is David Goddard. I'm Vice President of Business Development at Double Verify. For those of you who don't know Double Verify is a leading independent platform for digital media measurement software and analytics that authenticates quality of effectiveness of digital media around the world for the world's largest brands and platforms. And I'm excited about today's panel because this panel will look into what disinformation is, how has it grown, and what can be done by the industry to curb the spread. The focus is going to be on ad placement and demonetization, the code of practice on disinformation, and the simple things that can be done by you and by the industry to help tackle it. I will encourage the audience to participate. You've got the Q&A box as always down on the Zoom, so please enter your questions around this topic, and we'll try and get some time at the end or weave your questions into the conversation today. But I'm delighted to be joined by some fantastic thought leaders in the industry around this subject as well. And I'm going to invite, first and foremost, before we jump into the questions, my fellow panelists to introduce themselves. So if we wouldn't mind going around the virtual Zoom wheel, I can see Inez, you're top left for me, so I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Inez. I'm from IAB Europe team. I'm working as a public policy officer.
Thank you. Claire, you're top right. I'm going clockwise on my screen. It might be different for everyone.
Hi, I'm Claire Ritchie. I'm Global Head of Programmatic for Mediacom, working across our various global clients, strategies and activation.
Thank you very much. Justin.
Hi, I'm Justin Adler-Swanberg. I'm Director of Marketplace Quality at MediaMath, dealing with a variety of different topics, including things like policy and brand safety and disinformation as part of that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Christopher.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Kleinschmidt. I am part of the Samsung Ads unit based in London, but we are focusing on a connected TV video product for, again, kind of a service that we offer on Samsung televisions.
Thank you very much. Now, look, disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech are all terms that refer to content which advertisers do not want to be associated. Running next to harmful content can actually hurt brand equity as it simultaneously funds bad actors behind disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech. But to properly avoid these types of content, it's helpful to first understand the differences between each. And a good place to start would be looking at how the multiple stakeholders in the digital ecosystem define disinformation. And there was a recent exercise done by the European Commission, which is called the Code of Practice. And I think it'll be a great place to start to define disinformation at start and how the industry defined in the code of practice. And for this, I'd like to pass to Ines, because you were heavily involved in this process as well, as were a couple of others on this call. Could you walk through how we've defined it as an industry, please?
Thank you so much, David. I think before entering into the definition, it's important to take into account that the code of practice on disinformation has been an exercise, actually, with major online platforms, also another stakeholders from the AgTech industry, but also with NGOs, civil societies, research societies, and also fact-checking industry. And I think this is important because it was impulsed by the European Commission through a guidance that was actually aiming to strengthen the previous code that was released in 2018. And this guidance has been like the thing that the signatories followed to end up with a strengthened code of practice on disinformation this year. That was released actually in June. And the stakeholders and the signatories actually came up with a very broad definition for disinformation that includes not only the narrow definition of disinformation, but also misinformation, and also influence information operations and foreign interference in the information space, which is, of course, as you are seeing, a very broad definition. And actually, all this phenomena was already defined in the European Democracy Action Plan by the European Commission, that set a plan for the period between the 2019 and 2024. And one of the objectives to strengthen the European Union democracy has been actually tackling disinformation. And in this plan, it was defined disinformation actually very specifically, with it's actually the false or misleading content that is spread with intention of harming, and actually to deceive or influence the economic or political gain, with of course that can actually cause a public harm, which I think the key of this is the intention behind it. And that's, of course, the line that it was followed in the code of practice on disinformation. And overall, I think the signatories and the European Commission also supported this approach of choosing a broader definition, because at the end of the day, all the mitigation, the action mitigation risk that someone can take can also be applied to all other these phenomena, and at the end, overall, helping in the fight against disinformation in the EU space.
Thank you very much. I mean, as you said, many agree with this kind of definition. And one of the things that we're trying to achieve in this ecosystem is the ability to classify content with that, falls under that banner of disinformation, obviously misinformation and hate speech as well, in that sense, and enable clients to avoid it. But this is more challenging across multiple devices as well. And I'd like to kind of take a step back, because now that we've defined disinformation, Chris, please can you share how this definition translates across the industry, and specifically how does it relate to your area of specialism at Samsung Connected TV? Because do you foresee any challenges technically for the industry to overcome and to offer that level of transparency required to identify and avoid disinformation in connected TV?
Yeah, you know, and thanks for kind of setting me up for this, Dave. Like, I think to really kind of, you know, say what probably doesn't even need to be said. I think it's obvious kind of that this code is something that is obviously going to strengthen the measure to reduce, you know, manipulative behavior that's happening in the digital ecosystem. And when I think about this from a connected TV perspective, it's very interesting, because it's different than I think how a lot of other consumers might kind of interpret dis or misinformation that they're kind of exposed to in what I like to kind of call water cooler platforms. So, you know, more publishers that could be akin to, you know, like a social media platform or a website where, you know, there's not more kind of like UGC content. where there's a lot more ability for anybody to kind of start to spread mis and disinformation. When it comes to connected TV, it's actually very different because, again, the user experience is almost identical to linear TV. So we're talking about a curated piece of content that's basically being delivered in a video format. Now, Anna has kind of talked about this, and David, you kind of addressed this a little bit. A lot of it kind of comes down to, again, the quality of content that is actually being known, and there is a huge kind of burden on the platform, the distribution partner that's distributing that content, because it is curated to ensure that it is the highest quality. And this is something that Samsung's basically done from day one with our Samsung TV Plus AVOD/FAST OTT apps, connected TV services. But I think the biggest thing where it comes down to this, again, it really kind of gets down to like that ability of UGC content versus that curated content. Because again, when you think about curated content like you do in linear TV, there really isn't that much information you can share. There's not that many signals that you can actually send out that could identify when this is happening. You might have news stations, and we might get into this topic a little bit later, you might have news stations that kind of lean one way or the other from a political perspective, but it doesn't really talk about, there's really not a signal that's being sent that could say, hey, this is disinformation that's being spread by, an unauthorized source. So I think connected TV is definitely something where it can be seen probably as a lot more brand safe and should be seen as that. But I definitely think that there are steps that could be taken to help kind of identify that from an advertiser's perspective, to identify the content that they're asked to be running against. So I definitely think that there's some improvements that could be made, but definitely I think at the high level, it's a platform and a medium that is much more brand safe than I think people probably realize.
Thank you very much, Chris. And look, I think we could do an entire panel on video level transparency and the metadata required and how it needs to be patched. So we'll pause that element of the conversation today. But I think we can all agree that limiting spread of disinformation is necessary to drive trust in a digital ecosystem. I'd like to dig into the why. So why is tackling this topic in the advertising ecosystem so important, and who is pushing the agenda? Now, I'd love to hear, we've had kind of industry stakeholder perspective and publisher's perspective. I'd love to have a buyer perspective on this, because it's the ad dollars that the buy side are putting into the ecosystem that could be potentially most impacted, or the ones that we need to help demonetize this. So Claire, if I could come to you first, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from an agency perspective, we are curators of kind of huge volumes of media spend, absolutely huge. And as you touched on, David, our brands, and rightly so, they don't want to be associated with this information. We all want to promote good at the end of the day. And certainly no one wants to be promoting anything that could cause anyone any level of harm on whatever kind that may be, which ultimately is what disinformation is. And I think commercially associated to that, brand equity is directly affected by consumer confidence. So we've got a world in which obviously we want to be promoting good, we want to be doing the best thing with the kind of the responsible outlook of the media pounds that we spend. And we want to be kind of driving a good presence for our brand. But as agencies, what that translates to is being able to focus on partners and publishers who really support supply chain transparency. We can drive education for our people, for our brands, connecting both sides of the ecosystem. We kind of sit right in the middle between supply and demand. We hold the pennies a lot of the time, but we are very interconnected with both the supply and demand avenues. And I think to your question, we are all responsible for kind of pushing this agenda. There is no singularly accountable position in our ecosystem. We all hold the responsibility to limit the spread of disinformation and, importantly, fund responsible and factual media.
Thank you very much, Claire. And I agree with that statement. We are all responsible and need to take responsibility in this space. So and Justin, like as Claire was saying, you're in the middle between that supply and demand perspective as a demand side platform, which is critical for the delivery of these ad dollars. How do you see it, and what is the why behind tackling this topic is so important?
Right, thanks, David. Yeah, it's one of the things that's really important to understand about misinformation and disinformation is that you're actually talking about information that's causing social harm, right? So anybody who is serving as sort of a gatekeeper in terms of controlling the monetization of ads or the dissemination of ads has a responsibility. About 2.5 years ago, when the COVID crisis hit, we were working on our purpose-driven advertising initiative, which was specifically designed to focus on how advertising can facilitate social good. And it was very timely. A lot of the advances in brand safety technology based on contextual targeting had increased. And then also you had the Black Lives Matter movement with the George Floyd killings, where the same technology was also relevant. It became very important to actually take a position on these matters because you were talking about actual social harm. And then it's a brand safety issue, not only for the companies and the advertisers that are serving the ads or buying the ads, but also for anybody who's participating in any way in the ecosystem. It's a brand safety risk for platforms themselves, whether demand-side platforms, supply-side platforms, or publishers. So you are sort of handling two matters at once, both a public good and a business good by tackling this issue.
Thank you very much, Justin, and agree. That's on that social harm aspect is kind of critical. We've got to remember that there is an end user in all of this, and really they should be the focus of our task and improving it, because it improves our end user experience and the lack of reduced social harm there. But Inez, I'd love to come in, like, from a commission perspective that you're heavily involved in. I'm sure the why aligned with a lot of what we said, but is there anything else you can call out here with regards to the why behind tackling?
Yeah, sure. Actually, also following a bit what Justin said, I think, of course, disinformation and the fight against it has been part of the political agenda since already quite a lot of time, because the 2018 Code of Practice on Disinformation was proof of that. And after including that in the agenda of the European Democracy Action Plan, which is basically the biggest and the most important plan of the European Commission, proves that, of course, disinformation is something that matters and it's in the political agenda. And I think it's also key because I think the pandemic taught us all that disinformation is very fast evolving and can cause an actual harm to people. So that's why. And I think it's actually not gonna end only here. I think there is, of course, a lot to be done, and the Code of Practice on Disinformation and things like today's discussion, it's only gonna be the start.
Agree. Thank you very much, Inez. And look, we focused on why is it so important to avoid disinformation, and we're looking at the demonetization of disinformation, but and we've kind of focused on the buyer perspective as well here, but looking at the other side, the publisher. I used to work for a news publisher, and I know a lot of the concerns around misinformation hang around kind of challenging news cycles. So an approach used previously is let's avoid news. And it's critical in these challenging times that we support premium news with ad dollars. So how can we support these premium publishers, and how do we avoid these all or nothing scenarios for news? And yeah, this is kind of open to the floor, but maybe Claire, I can come to you first with regards to a buyer's perspective. Like, how are you? It's a really challenging line, right, to navigate. So how are you doing it from a buyer side perspective?
It is just that it is incredibly challenging to navigate. And I think one thing we have to remind ourselves and everyone else of is that news and opinion editorials are very, very different. We need to be able to support kind of factual news sources and journalism. We have to have a differentiator when it then comes to the opinion that sits around that. And granted, that's not as clear cut as I'm making it sound. There's a lot behind this, but we do have to remember that, I think, first and foremost. Programmatically, we have more levers and control in our buying than ever before. We need to use these to support here rather than the kind of blanket shut off, I suppose, that we may have had previously. And I think there's an element of relying on your basics and having best practice in place in terms of, if we've got kind of appropriate brand suitability, brand safety strategies in place for our clients on a day-to-day, and we are working with that real sweet spot between AI and human optimization, we've got our inclusion and our exclusion strategies, etc. We can then be much more nimble, much more agile when it comes to the nuance that we need to face a situation that we may find ourselves in, and do it confidently, kind of navigating through problem areas. We've had a brilliant initiative in our broader businesses as Group M recently, where we are doing just the opposite, and we are supporting our brands getting back to news rather than steering quite so definitely away from it in moments of crisis, which has been very kind of uplifting and very positive to see, and I hope we'll see a lot more of that.
I like to kind of comment on that, because I think Claire is spot on, obviously, when it comes to this. And again, I'm thinking more from a video / but like specifically kind of more linear style, connected TV ecosystem, which again is just inherently a vetted source already. Like if I think of kind of the connected TV environment, a vast majority of what's on kind of the OTT apps is going to be more of your scripted types of content. So that's a very different subject. But you think about anything that could be live, where there could be the opportunity to kind of have less real-time action. It's the news channels, and think of like the events that have been happening across the world this entire year. You think of a news channel that will likely probably be the most popular channel during these times of crisis, because people are trying to become informed. And then that's where I think it comes back to the publishers, and the platform to ensure that the quality of content is up to snuff. And again, I think connected TV and linear TV, it's pretty well spoken that, again, like that's not as much of an issue. But what I find fascinating though is, again, Claire kind of mentioned about the signals that are and the levers that are being available. When it comes to connected TV, there's actually probably not that much from a programmatic perspective. There's a big push in the industry for different content signals. And this is something where I think a lot of kind of digital buyers are really trying to figure out, what sort of content are they aligning their brands with in a connected TV universe, right? In the hopes that it's aligning with a brand safe, environment that wouldn't provide an opportunity for dis or misinformation. And I think live news is probably the only part of that could be a bit subjective. But again, like it's going to come down to, I think, the brands and the agencies' POV, because they have to understand that, yeah, these live news stations could be talking about something that might not be what their brand wants to associate with, but then the risk is avoiding that altogether and losing out on the opportunity of getting, the right audience that wants to be informed on those topics. So I think it's trying to, drive that parallel that I think, again, it really kind of comes down to the signals that connected TV will start to send and could start to send down the road.
Thank you, Chris. Before I jump to Inez, because I'd love to hand to Inez at the end of this to talk about what is in the code and what is the advice of the code. But Justin, Claire mentioned two sophisticated tools available to programmatic buyers, and I feel you're best placed to talk to that. So what can be done to support premium publishers, but also protect?
Yeah, so I had mentioned before the advances in contextual technology. So we, as a platform, offer our buyers many different options that are available for contextual and targeting solutions. And what's really important is to be able to use very customized targeted solutions that are very precise in terms of what they're blocking and preventing, and also allowing. So we offer solutions that include disinformation and misinformation protections through partners like NewsGuard, through a couple of different providers. We also work with Double Verify, of course, and we work with other contextual providers as well. And the important piece is the targeting of those solutions. We also have a platform-wide protection. We've partnered with the Global Disinformation Index, who have a very targeted approach that attempts to actually identify disinformation in an through an unbiased methodology. And we provide that for all of our partners, which actually turned out to be quite fortuitous. When the Ukraine war happened, it turned out that there were quite a number of sources that I think had largely gone under the radar for a lot of folks as accepted sort of news sources, but everybody suddenly was like, wait a second, these are actually purveying disinformation. And fortunately, quite a number of them were already being prevented in a very targeted way from being monetized on our platform via Global Disinformation Index. But the important thing is to make sure that the solutions are very targeted, and then also to support news. You want to promote news. So like I said, we've got NewsGuard. We also have a news marketplace. You want to kind of do both positive and negative, but precision is key. So making sure that your solutions can be very precise and targeted rather than blunt keyword blocking and things like that is critical.
Yeah, I agree. And look, it's great to hear again, like there are a number of tools at the fingertips of buyers today to enable them to protect themselves, but also support premium news. So using sophisticated tools rather than blunt all or nothing approaches is wise. And look, I only encourage conversations with your premium publisher partners to understand more about them, and also how you can work with them to support premium journalism and quality journalism out there, because it's critical. But I just want to come to Ines as well, like, because the Code of Practice has been written and signed and supported by many. What did it say on this topic of supporting publishers?
Well, actually, I'm afraid I'm not gonna give like the ultimate solution, of course, because the Code of Practice on disinformation, it's well, everyone that was seated at the table were aware that there is no magic solution to this problem. There is not one solution that is applicable to everyone as well. So at the end, what the Code of Practice did is to set a framework of what to do to improve the environment. And one of the first things being like everyone signing up for it should have policies that tackles this information in place. So that's the first thing that should be done, of course. And I think it's important to extend that to the whole ad chain. And of course, the Code of Practice also supports that these policies are not only like the end of the chain or in the beginning of the chain, but in the before, during, and after placing an ad, which I think is very important. And the last thing I think is, of course, the set a conversation, and the Code of Practice on disinformation has opened up a discussion that is gonna keep going. It's not gonna end only with the signing up the code, but it's gonna keep on bringing everyone back together to see where people are at and what else can be done in the future.
Thank you very much. I just want to take a pause because we've got a couple of questions left, but look at European Commission's Code of Practice on disinformation, but also keep your eye out. If you haven't got time, there's quite a few pages on that, but if you keep your eye out IAB Europe as well, because we're going to be releasing a guide to tackling disinformation in the ecosystem imminently. And this will summarize much of the advice this panel is giving, and also give you some information on how you can get involved, whether it's the Code of Practice and a variety of other things as well. So keep your eye out for that, and I'll promote that at the end of this panel as well, shamelessly. Look, the conversation heavily been steered towards the impact that disinformation has on brands and the ecosystem. But like Claire, as you pointed out, and Justin as well, throughout this is the end user, the consumer, and the society will be the ones impacted most if the spread of disinformation isn't halted. So I just want to focus slightly as who is responsible for halting that? And we've mentioned demonetization, but what role does advertising play? Ines, I'm going to come back to you. I know you finished the last question, but come back to you because I think it's summarized quite nicely, and there's a focus on demonetization in the Code of Practice, an entire section, in fact. Could you just chat about that, and then we'll hand around the group around responsibility and demonetization?
Of course, yeah, the Code of Practice on disinformation actually focuses on the funding disinformation, which I think is key. But I would say, of course, like At the end, online advertising is the one that powers and funds the content. And we have to be also aware that this free and open ad-supported internet is the one that democratizes the access to information, which is also in fact what makes available information to everyone. And at the end is what it's good for tackling disinformation. This access to good and fact-checked information, it's key to tackle the problem. So I think also that's why since the beginning, the European Commission has tried to get involved all the ad chain into the fight against disinformation.
Thank you. But who is responsible? Justin, I'm going to come to you first and foremost, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's very important to understand when dealing with this topic is that anybody who is part of the chain of monetizing ads or serving ads where disinformation comes into play is going to be held responsible. One can attempt to remain on the sidelines, but unfortunately what the public, activists, political bodies will not allow that to happen. So it's very important to realize that even if one attempts not to feel responsible for it, the public at large will hold companies responsible. There are quite sophisticated activists who are very skillful at identifying who's funding what and how. There are political bodies who are under pressure to take action, such as the European Commission, and the public is becoming more and more educated about these issues and making buying decisions based on them. So we will all be held accountable. And so it's important to address that head on and act accordingly.
I think acting accordingly and addressing it head on is kind of a really good way to summarize it. And I'm conscious we've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to jump to the last question. So sorry if anyone else had any other points, because we focus on demonetization as just one tactical approach that we can implement, but what more can be done? And maybe if we could just do one quick around the virtual room on this last question to head out, what more can be done other than demonetization, which is a critical component here? Who would like to start?
Happy to go. I think from my perspective, we all experience the pace of change in our industry on a daily basis. But despite that, it's easy to forget. I think best practice and approach to the spread of disinformation is no different. And we all have kind of an opportunity to make sure we're informed. And from my perspective, where we can be actively coming up against this, kind of away from demonetization, is creating diverse teams, representing our issues and our standards internally, and making sure that we have voices that can see all sides of the coin, so that we're not put in those positions where we are having to create knee-jerk reactions to crisis or to negativity or to things that we see in the news, because largely those knee-jerk reactions come when we don't fully understand the ramifications, or we don't fully understand the market or the region and place. So I think once we have these strategies and we have kind of people who are willing to be vocal about their feelings, it's reevaluation. We can't sit on the practices that we have. We need to keep coming back to them. Our tools are brilliant. We've said that. They give us volumes of information so that we can understand what's going on. That also gives us the impact of these decisions. So it's our responsibility to keep going back to that impact and understanding and creating balance with our brands, with our consumers, and ultimately supporting responsible news and journalism.
Yeah, and I would just kind of echo on that too. Again, I think a lot of this, again, when you think about the information that's being shared and passed from a programmatic perspective, signals need to be stronger, particularly from a video perspective. Again, these were never shared on linear TV. I think connected TV is that environment where you can start to kind of share a lot more information in real time to help buyers understand what they're actually leaning against. But I think more importantly is actually getting the consumer's privacy at the heart of this. And again, I think this is something where, again, if I speak about Samsung and other publishers that are kind of coming into play, having a consent management platform is actually a big step forward for us in the right direction, because we're now actually getting the consumer consent to allow us to do the third-party tracking, right, through different premium vendors. I won't mention any names, but maybe a few on this call, but working with a few partners to actually then start to do third-party tracking of that. And that's something that hasn't existed in connected TV, but I think 2023 is going to start to bring that, and it's going to kind of allow, again, that third-party verification when it comes to understanding the content that brands are aligning themselves with.
I think that it's very important to have very clear policies. You have to take a position on this. It's, as I was saying, you really can't stay on the sidelines to handle it effectively. And sometimes what that means is, the word we were throwing out, demonetization, which when you're dealing with business and the goal is monetization, can pose some challenging, choices. And you have to be willing to stand on your choices and understand that there's a bigger picture that you're trying to facilitate for both the public good and for your business.
And I can maybe finalize with a more public policy view, which is, of course, discussions as the ones of today. I think it's a great start, because at the end, what we are doing is like voicing the concerns and the problem, which is great. And also, of course, the code of practice on disinformation, I think it's another great way, or another regional codes on the code of practice on this, the same on disinformation. And the last thing, of course, we are about to release, David was saying it, IAB Europe, a guide to disinformation, that I think also is a great start, because we actually brought together different members from different sides of the ad chain to basically say what's being done, what it can be done, and also sets, of course, a great discussion or a start of a discussion.
Thank you very much for rounding off the call in such a powerful way. Look, just to summarize, we need to all take responsibility in this ecosystem. We have the tools available to us today to deliver this and demonetize disinformation, enabling the spread of disinformation to be halted in a way. And we still need to support premium publishers and quality journalism. But the first and foremost thing you can do is get educated on this and learn more about this. So do keep your eyes out, another shameless plug, for the IAB Europe's guide on disinformation will be released soon, and also brush up on the European Commission's Code of Practice, because each of those has really clear guidance on how to make a difference in the ecosystem and tackle disinformation. But thank you all for listening. Thank you to the panelists. You're amazing as always. And Lauren, over to you.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you, Claire, Inez, Chris, and Justin for sharing your insights and a lot of valuable things for us all to take away, and definitely a lot for us to think about. Just going to share my screen, because next up we have Daniel Knapp joining us, who is our chief economist. And he's going to be going through supply chain transparency and sustainability, just giving us a quick overview, and then he'll be handing over to Lisa, who's the RVP Advertiser Solutions EMEA at Pragmatic. He's going to be leading a panel discussion on the topic with a number of experts there. So I'm hoping Daniel is on his way to join the call. There he is. Hi, Daniel. Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand the floor over to you.
Fantastic. Just allow me to share my screen and I can get going. Thank you. Wonderful. Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel Knapp. I'm the Chief Economist at IAB Europe, and I just wanted to provide you with an overview of a more economic perspective, macro and macroeconomic perspective on supply chain transparency, and also how it relates to the topic of sustainability. I'll just have a very few minutes, so I'll keep the introduction short and focus more on the machinations of the supply chain and leave the implications for sustainability, economic, environmental, and social to the panel. Programmatic today in Europe, as of our ADEX benchmark study, accounts for around 57% of all display. advertising. This is excluding, and this is actually excluding social. So we have direct IO bookings and we have programmatic. This includes banners, video, native, and audio as well. We're seeing a move away from the open market slowly to private marketplaces and programmatic direct paths, and also a fast ramp up, in particular in second mover markets in Eastern Europe, etc. Meaning that questions around programmatic transparency and sustainability are not just focused on the leading markets, but they are a pan-European question that every market needs to grapple with. We know how complex chains are. I showed this chart before. Just as a reminder, supply chains in this market remain incredibly complex, and we have in the past seen huge calls for increased transparency, whatever that transparency means, which are now being expanded to kind of understand, well, what does transparency really mean, and what does it get us? And does it get us a more kind of economically balanced ecosystem, so economic sustainability? What's the impact on carbon emissions, environmental, and also we mentioned it in the disinformation panel, what's the impact on consumers and on civil society? So in a sense, social sustainability. And all these things are affected, at least in part, by the complexity of the chain. And we could see recently on Twitter, fascinating analysis that looked at the potential combinations of supply chains on a single publisher, and very compelling visualization showed there are 40 million possible supply chains, all, of course, creating complexity to manage things, and also creating data on their carbon emissions. We can see that relations in the open market are incredibly commoditized, meaning here we look at how many DSPs are present across a certain number of SSPs on a sample of 5 publishers. This is just the open market, not the private market. And we can see most players interact with every other player. So there's not just duplication, there is multiplication going on. But we can see there is a reason why this complexity remains, because if we actually conducted a study here, look across eCPMs, CPMs across DSP and SSP combinations, we can see huge differences, even controlled for the type and the number of advertisers, hour of day, day and week, etc. Meaning if we want to tackle environmental and other forms of sustainability, economic sustainability, we need to not just look at the number of paths and with a machete cut these paths, we need to look at the underlying microeconomics of how these actors work with each other and find ways to ensure that it's economically and environmentally sustainable at the same time, plus of course then also socially sustainable. But these things are very important. We can't just cut paths and without understanding how combinations of paths in fact affect advertiser and publisher economics, suggesting that just blindly taking the shortest path is not always the best route. However, we've seen publishers going from the more the better, so volume of integrations, to fewer strategic partnerships, which allows them to control more about their supply and demand partners, and also understand better how they can develop sustainable business models and branch out into other sustainability discussions in the environmental domain. Here's just an example. This is no judgment of any party, but you can see because some smaller SSPs are very, very crucial for specific types of inventory, of course, but you can see how quickly, in terms of volume of spend, things taper off. Similar things we've seen with buyers, moving to fewer direct programmatic relationships, fueled by in-housing, closer agency SSP partnerships, potentially things like the trade desks, open path, will also have an effect on transparency of the market and also how sustainable economics, CO2 footprint and other things are. The core issue with transparency is we need to define what it really means. There are many initiatives and many definitions, and this timeline here just shows how much work has been done. Yet despite all this work, we still have, I think, more questions than answers often, in particular about deciding what do we focus on. Is it about auditing things? Is it about optimization? Is it about competition economics, disinfo, or other things? Now, the notion of environmental sustainability has, in a sense, replaced in many public ad tech discourses the idea of transparency as such. It's a new outlet for transparency, but it also gives, I think, justification to the idea of transparency and moves it from an ad tech centric or an ad ops topic to more of a CMO topic, as sustainability, of course, is much more sparkly and glitzy as going through SSP logs is. So I think the development is very clear. We moved in marketing from changing consumer behavior in terms of sustainability to carbon offsetting, sponsoring, funding, etc. Also to a new paradigm where we realize it's actually the complexity of our supply chain. It's these 40 million paths. It's different things that affect how sustainable advertising can be. And activating our digital media in a responsible manner, not blindly shorter paths, but figuring out which path work in which way and emphasizing those paths is going to be crucial. A few questions to take away in terms of future of transparency and its connection with sustainability. We need to define what good really looks like. They're very, very different definitions, partly, of course, aligned by what we're focusing on, and also very, very different incentive structures from different participants in the value chain. We need to understand what is the role of political disclosure pressures in fostering transparency, how standards existing tools can be better used in new configurations, for instance, to understand what the value of a certain supply chain is. You understand, well, if there are structural changes in the market, post-third-party cookies, will this automatically have an knock-on effect on complexity of chains and thereby foster sustainability in further ways? Also, does the world organization of things that move to one-on-one relationships in a sense make at least parts of the transparency debate obsolete? What's the economic value creation of transparency? I.e., what are we getting at with transparency is important to consider. Necessarily, can we really do a binary short good, long bad, or are there more nuanced ways to understand how supply chains can be better for the environment? And with those thoughts, I'm going to pass back to Lauren. Thank you.
Daniel, thank you so much for that introduction. That's super interesting and actually very much looking forward to diving into it with our panelists now. So I'm going to just hand over the mic shortly to Lisa, who's going to moderate this panel session. She's then going to be joined by Joel from the Trade Desk, Matt from Index Exchange, Laura, who's the head of sustainability at Essence, and then Phil Acton, who is from Adform. Hopefully everybody's now slowly joining the session. I can see Lisa's there. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. I think we're just gradually letting everyone connect, so I will hand the mic over to you. And as always, if anyone does have any questions for our panelists, please do add them to the Q&A box, and we'll try and get to as many of them as we can. Lisa, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Lauren. So thanks everyone for joining today. This is going to be a great discussion about sustainability and what it means for the ecosystem. So I'm actually going to suggest that instead of having everyone on the panel introduce themselves, I have the question of the day that we're going to start with, and then I will pass this over to Laura. So I think Daniel highlighted some of the key sustainability issues within the supply chain. What do you guys think the biggest problem is, and where do we start? So Laura, over to you.
Hello. I'm Laura from Essence, and I am, full disclosure, a head of sustainability and not a programmatic expert. So I'm just going to caveat that here now. I think in terms of our biggest challenge, I think, well, Daniel's highlighted it really, isn't it? It's the complexity of it all, and it is the lack of transparency. I also feel that it's probably a mindset shift as well, because I think previous initiatives such as brand safety has seen publishers feel like they have taken the full weights of the sort of commercial impact of those sort of initiatives. So it's making sure supply chain transparency is about collaborating with your supply chain and working together to identify how everyone can create value out of a new supply chain and create new principles and work towards that. It's not about one party in a supply chain dictating a set of principles and rules. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge that we have, because we do need to come together and collaborate. We do need to have a level of trust of why we're all collaborating. And fundamentally, we need to all galvanise around a consistent methodology in terms of measurement. So I feel like I've said a lot of challenges rather than one big challenge, but I think they all sort of end up being the same challenge in the sense of we need to probably change the way that we all work together and start from a base of collaboration and aligning on what we are trying to achieve, which ultimately is decarbonisation. Because for advertising to have a role in a net zero society, we need to make sure that we are fit for purpose and we're not wasting the energy that is so valuable a resource.
Definitely. I love the idea of collaboration. Joel, over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. I am Joel. I am the Senior Director of Partnerships for the Trade Desk, so looking after our SSP and publisher relationships, and that is the ones Laura says we should be collaborating with. So yeah, I completely agree with what Laura said and what Daniel said before, that complexity and from my perspective and in my role, the complexity of the supply chain is the big challenge to tackle. I perhaps slightly disagree with Laura, but it's very slight. I don't think we're going to have a fight about it. I think different entities, and not one entity, should set the rules, but someone needs to initiate the rule setting at least. And you know, we have certain rules. We won't buy one SSP via another SSP with whom we're integrated, and that is for the direct benefit of our clients, because you're not paying for an additional hop. There isn't an additional party taking a fee, but it also, that supply chain transparency and the efficiency of the supply chain, the optimization of it, should reduce carbon emissions. And I think that sort of situation, the sort of the double-edged sword of it is, or double-edged benefit of it, I guess, is at the core of how I personally view we should approach this. Is that, yes, obviously getting to a carbon neutral position as an industry is absolutely key. But and speaking to my wife, who actually works in the sustainability field, you kind of have to give other benefits to people. You know, an individual might be altruistic and might choose to do the right things, but many corporations, many investors need to see the carbon benefit and the financial benefit for them. So if we can tackle both at the same time, we'll get more people's attention and we'll make change much faster as well, I would imagine.
Definitely. Matt, over to you.
Hey guys, great to be here today. My name is Matt Barish. I lead the Americas at Index Exchange, as well as our global publishing business. And I'm joining you today from London, where it's a beautiful day, and excited to be here. I think, you know, you guys touched upon a million different points, probably all of which I would have checked the box on mentioning had sequence been different here. But, you know, I think really the advertising business has always been about art and science. And this is the redefinition of science in some degree, right? In some respects. And so, you know, when you think about the advertising business today relative to where it was probably when we all began, it's really complicated, right? It's really complicated. And so, you know, the recurrent theme that I'm hearing here is, you know, how do we simplify that, right? How do we get back to an industry that is, you know, perhaps more value driven, but, you know, less influenced by a number of parties that, you know, perhaps are there to make a buck rather than influence change. And change can be at industry level. Change can be because it's driving the economics of the industry. Change can be because it's driving practice and standards. And I think that comes back to, you know, when it comes to sustainability, what does it all mean, right? This is a nascent concept. This is something that, you know, 2 or 3 years ago probably was foreign to most of us. And I think today, when you look at a global level, and, you know, I live in the US, I'm sitting in Europe, I run a global business, you know, I think there's a real need for education. And so who actually begins that process, right? I think, you know, you've seen, you know, I'll bring up his name for the first time, Brian O'Kelly, right? One of the most polarizing figures in this space. He goes from being a ruthless CEO to a virtuous CEO. And all of a sudden, this becomes a really relevant conversation. And so, you know, when you think about what that means, you know, I think sitting in Europe today, this is a really relevant conversation. And, you know, in certain, as you start to dive deeper in certain regions within the continent, it becomes a more relevant conversation. And so it's a right now conversation. And we all know it's a right conversation. But I think the real big challenge here is all around the world, it's a what's that conversation. And so how do we define what that means? And once we do that, we start the ball rolling.
Thanks so much. Phil, over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Phil Acton from Adform, not PwC as it said on the opening slide, but delighted to be with everybody. And I don't know if I'm going last, but it's always a bit of a challenge with what everybody's said. I think in terms of how I can, add to that, I think in terms of what we need to tackle first in fraud, viewability, the weight of ad creative and so on, I think it's all of those, and it comes down to trust. And I think, again, continuing on that theme of sort of education, because I think if you look across the whole of Europe, there's a nation that's local to the markets, or whether it's coming from the EU, that's really trying to put blocks on advertising as a whole, as though we're an industry that doesn't really add value. And I think that Daniel did a great job before taking us through a load of data, but actually a couple of days ago he did a podcast on this with James Chandler in the UK, where he said some of the pressure coming from the EU Commission was for online to say stop using targeted advertising, where that it was a kind of a full-on strategy. Yet in other sectors, the EU is actively promoting personalization as a sort of a holy grail of offline and or content strategies. So for me, targeted advertising and personalized advertising are the same, except for the wording. And it's perhaps because the government are under pressure from lobbyists and consumers who are at the end of the day are those that use the internet. I think we need to always not only educate ourselves, but as Tanya from Show Hero said at the start of the webinars, we need to educate more people. We need to explain to them why we're trying to clean up the supply chain, educate the consumers as we go. Then naturally, things like fraudulent impressions, using proper viewability metrics, ensuring as much spend goes from brands to publishers as possible by choosing the most direct routes. And of course, the environmental impact of that, because we're reducing ad wastage and so preventing lots of heavy, bad for the environment banners. I think that's the kind of thing that the average internet user wants to see and wants to hear about. So I think it's great that we talk about these initiatives and people talk about Brian O'Kelly and so on, but we need to educate everybody outside of our industry as to what we're doing and why we're cleaning it up. And I actually think that will have a knock-on effect from some of the pressure we get with regards to legislation.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Phil. So what does sustainability in the supply chain actually mean? And how do we think we can achieve this? So Joel, I'll start with you.
So I think sustainability in the supply chain just means understanding the environmental impact, first of all, of every single decision. And that goes from the people buying the ads, the planning at the beginning, all the way through to the end user seeing an ad on their TV, laptop, phone, or even an out-of-home billboard. It's not easy, and I know we'll come on to talk about that later. But you need to look to solve all of that, and that's obviously sounds like an absolute nightmare. But I think the approach just has to be systematic and pragmatic. You just, it's like when I have two young kids, when I have to tidy a room, I walk into the room and feel like I'm going to cry. But you just have to start at one end and work your way through to the other end, and that's kind of what we've got to do as an industry. We have as not just an industry, but as an entire global population, been behaving like little kids and just chucking our mess around everywhere and not thinking about the consequences of our actions. And so I should caveat that I love my kids, but I just hate tidying up after them. And that is what we need to do as an industry. You've got to optimize the existing processes we have. We've got to ensure that everything we do works in the most efficient way that it can do, but also look to the future. And even if you can't make it as efficient as you want to now, what can you do in 6, 9, 12 months, or even 5 years? And ultimately you have to start now. And that means, we've rolled out OpenPath recently as a direct to publisher integration solution. That is one option of, going direct to the publisher, removing some of the data processing. But to Daniel's point,
direct isn't always the best method. It won't necessarily always be the most efficient, and you've got to look at the path you take. I'm sure there is a worst option and there are worse options, but you need to strip things down to the best options. And I think everybody has a responsibility to do it. It doesn't have to come from the advertiser. It doesn't have to come from the user. You know, I think Daniel had a really excellent slide showing how many SSPs the average publisher works with, and the incremental benefit once they got outside the sort of top 20 was negligible. And I'm certain the same works for advertisers as well. I'm not just hitting on the DSP, on the SSPs, DSPs too. There are plenty of us in the industry, and it's important for absolutely everyone to look at their partners, look at their path, look at what's next in line after them and what comes before them, and try and optimize and improve that and make it much more efficient as possible.
Thanks, Joel. Matt, over to you.
Yeah, I think, you have to follow the money here, right? And it all begins with the marketer in my mind. And, the marketer dictates. And so when you look at the evolution of the industry, you look at some of the, problems that we've solved over the past decade or so, I'll take viewability as a great example, right? I think there were CMOs who stood up and said, hey, it's come to my attention that I'm buying inventory that's not viewable, or I'm buying, fraudulent inventory. How do we start to clean up a very murky gray area? And so when I look at where this begins and I think about it, and I look at the statements that major companies make, CMOs make, which are virtuous, right? And they speak to the consumer and they say, hey, we are committed to being carbon free or whatnot. All of a sudden the agency jumps and goes, hey, we support that too, because that's going to help us to retain the client. But are they doing it because it retains the client, or are they doing it for the proper purpose? And that trickles down the line. And so when you start to think about following the dollar, there's that level of accountability, there's that level of partnership rather than vendorship that I think you have to think about in a world where, whether it's Joel, whether it's Philip, we have to be fully transparent to one another in terms of how we best activate and how we best clean this up, right? And so whether that's driving efficiency in terms of how we bid on, on programmatic media, and, I think there's a level of cost effectiveness there, which is where this began. And now that evolution goes towards, how do we make the world a better place? Because there's just a ton of waste there. And so, yes, it becomes cheaper, but yes, the future becomes brighter. I think you have to start to think about this holistically. And so, what does it mean and how do we get there? Well, I think it begins with, trade organizations like the IAB stepping up and herding cats and getting the buy side and the sell side and everyone in between to align on some type of definition. And then sort of the next iteration or the next step of that is, there are companies that are popping up, I think, which are, they're well-intentioned, but they're for profit. And this is ironic, right? Because, again, I get that we're running businesses, but, the question is this a huge TAM and a huge opportunity? Or is this being motivated by the proper opportunity to, sort of do right? And so I'll leave that there, and I'll let you guys kind of think about that and what it means.
Thanks, Matt. Couldn't agree more. So, Phil, over to you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that last comment about the them being, kind of commercial companies but we all seem to want to kind of work with them. I think I don't want to turn this into an identity conversation, because obviously we're talking about supply path optimization, but I think actually we find quite often at Adform the two go hand in hand, because here we are trying to clean up the supply path by, having as fewer hops as possible from the DSP or from the advertiser to the publisher. But actually, I think in terms of sustainability in the supply chain, I think one area of it is finding a solution to the third-party cookie is a way of building sustainability, because we can't just wait for Google to kill this off. We've got to, kind of actively realize as an industry that if we find a viable solution, this is right for the consumer, it's right for the advertisers, and it's also right for the publishers, which I think can only be a good thing. And I think without a viable solution, then the ad industry, probably outside of the walled gardens, will be fairly unsustainable. So I think that's been a big focus for us, is as we've at Adform, as we've tried to clean up and look at supply path optimization, and you know, we're in a good position because we have both buy and sell side pipes. We've also understood that actually having those integrations into the publishers and allowing them to send us things like first-party data, first-party IDs, has also had a commercial benefit. And I think for something to grow and take legs, you know, it has to have that as well. But I think it benefits the user and the consumer because it's a much more ethical way of approaching it. The publishers, you know, for them it's almost like a golden age of publishing again, because what they have, their data has become really worth something. And as Tim said at the very start this morning, he said, I think it was 80% of brands said buying quality media and being willing to pay a premium for it was key to them. So all of a sudden we have a benefit of supply path optimization and cleaning up that supply chain. Is we come back with a model that's really good for consumers because their data is used in an ethical way. It's really good for advertisers because you know, they're able to use first-party data and first-party IDs, and also use that across things like Safari as well. But it's also good for the industry because it means we will have an open internet advertising business come, you know, whenever it is that Google decides to kill off the cookie on Chrome. So I think that's a big part, and the two do definitely go hand in hand.
Thanks, Phil. So Laura, I know that at the start of this, you said you're the sustainability expert, not the programmatic expert. So how do you think that we as an industry are tackling some of the issues that the guys raised? And have you actually seen any best practices?
I think, not to be controversial, but I'm okay with new people entering the industry with new tools and technology and making a profit from it, because sustainability is about creating a thriving economy and society for all, now and forever. So, and actually I think it's more for the rest of the industry that we were so behind the curve that we weren't thinking about this and bringing out our own initiatives. So I think as an industry we're behind versus other sectors, which probably is why the trust issue is not there as well with consumers, because we need to get our own house in order. And I also feel like, you know, in terms of what best practice looks like, I think it's about having verified commitments. So just as WPP have committed to science-based targets and having net zero media plans by 2030, that is a requirement that's going to cascade down the supply chain, because we cannot achieve that without having all of our suppliers and partners aligned with net zero. And I want to be really clear that net zero is not the same as carbon neutral. Again, circling back to our point about education, I think that there's a few quarters that are using those terminologies interchangeably, and they're not. And again, we need to educate ourselves and bring it to the fore. I think in terms of best practice and what I've seen out there, we're all, and I know this is a big cliche, but we're all at the start of this conversation. I avoided saying journey there. But I think, and that bringing it back to the topic that we're talking about, trust and transparency, I think we need to embrace that and be willing to admit that we're at the start of that. No one has got one silver bullet that's going to solve this for us. And actually we need to, and that's why the commitments are so important, because we need to align on what our commitment is. What is our end goal? Our end goal is decarbonisation of the ecosystem. And that definition already exists. What that means is how we're going to get there and what the consequences are of that. There'll be some winners and there'll be some losers. And it's then how do we set ourselves up to be, how do suppliers set themselves up to be the winners of that scenario? So I don't know if I'm answering your question now, but I just, in terms of best practices, I think there's interesting technology out there like Glimpse in terms of addressing the amount of energy that's being generated in header bidding. I think a really simple way of thinking about it is, if data is energy and energy is carbon, identifying sort of wasted data, and vanity data. So heavy creative, for example, that's going to be viewed on a mobile phone. Is that necessary? I think the opportunity for streaming digital formats to reduce the carbon footprint is an easy win that we can all implement now. Yeah, just being able to, for me, it is using Scope 3 at the moment to sort of measure what the carbon footprint is down to the impression level and see what's driving those emissions. So, you know, wasteful ad tech, old code that's sitting on domains, all of these are best practice in terms of efficiency as well. So, you know, it's really about operational efficiency for everyone that's in the supply chain at the moment. For me, would be best practice as a baseline, and then we can move forward in what reduction really looks like.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Laura, for that. So I know you kind of talked about a bit on the measurement of the impact our ecosystem has on the climate, but let's talk about an even bigger question of how does that work and who funds it? So Joel, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm happy to start here. So I think the funding part is challenging. You know, there's a lot of big companies who can afford to fund it themselves, but our industry is built on startups. You know, even Google and Facebook were startups sort of within. I'm going to take a risk here and say the professional memory of everyone on this call, and you know, we can rely on Google, Facebook, and you know, Trade Desk and the big agency groups to kind of fund it ourselves. But ultimately, we are really the ones generating it, so we should be funding it anyway. I think it needs to become an inherent cost of business that you have to do this, because it's, you know, it's what we do. We are all generating significant amounts of emissions, so we have to be responsible for that in our own way. And I know I mentioned my wife earlier. To be quite frank with you, should probably have her here instead of me. But she worked on a recent government initiative. She was seconded to the Department of Work and Pensions, and they implemented something called the TCFD, not to be confused with TCF, which is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So that is now part of law that large financial institutions are obliged to participate in this, and they have to create a report on their business's exposure to climate change, how they are contributing to climate change, and how they're going to manage it, how they plan to fix it in the future, and have an actual action plan, which is something Laura mentioned. And you know, we've got Ad Net Zero for our industry, and again, showing it to my wife, who is really the sustainability expert. She was actually really quite impressed by it, because it is quite a clear action plan. You know, it starts at what's the impact of you know, the ads you run on in terms of carbon emissions, and it goes all the way down to the events you run and the travel you do as a business and everything in between. It's not just a token gesture. It is actually an important and well thought out action plan. And I think there is an argument that governments need to, and probably over time will, make that a legal compulsion, as they have with TCFD for the finance industry. We will all have to do this at some point. So we may as well get ahead of it now. You know, it's like the old planting a tree analogy. It's the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. So we kind of all need to plant that tree now, all become part of Ad Net Zero, and even look at, you know, there's the RE 100, which is a movement for businesses to become based on 100% renewable electricity or renewable energy. And there's things like TCFD, like, have a look at it, see what you can do, see if it's relevant to your business. You might not need to want to disclose anything yet, but major investors are looking at the sort of green initiatives, the renewable initiatives, the carbon neutral, or you know, otherwise sort of beneficial and sustainable approaches of businesses. So it's actually going to benefit you financially. And you know, to the point Laura made, it's fine for businesses to make money out of sustainability, because I mean, ultimately that's going to get more people's attention. You can do the right thing, but if you can do the right thing and make investors money, even better, they'll move faster in your direction.
Thanks, Joel. So Laura, back to you on what are your thoughts on what changes can we do? What are the small things? How do we crawl before we run that can make an impact, I guess, on tomorrow?
Yeah, I suppose I come from this as an agency point of view. So as an agency, and a bit like Joel said at the top of this conversation, we already have sort of principles that we put in place in terms of efficiencies. I think, again, the team like Matt Mack, who's our SVP of product, already has done the supply path optimization so that we have a much smaller pool of SSPs that we deal with. You know, I think, yes, it is oversimplified, but having a shorter supply chain at this moment is a better option for us. So, for example, stripping out sort of networks, etc., because they add a level of opaqueness, they have a level of margin, etc., within the ecosystem. Just thinking about the supply path that you're buying into, and that is sustainable, but also in terms of transparency is vital. I think thinking about how your creative is running, like I said, thinking about how you're delivering that creative, streaming versus the traditional download, and just ensuring that you've got some best practices in place, like turn your campaign off when you hit your KPIs, don't just leave it running. Like, as an agency, there's some really basic best practices that, you know, again, coming back to what is waste and what is vanity, and ensuring that you're hitting your KPIs as efficiently as possible is what we should be doing now. And for me, I think the focus over the next 6 months has to be measurement. You know, everyone needs to know what their carbon footprint is of their business, and have an understanding of that, and where that is being driven as well. Is it your travel? Is it your offices? You know, if you know, understanding where your biggest carbon hotspots are is critical. Is that?
Yeah. I think those are great.
From a trade desk perspective, like we've seen, my colleague Ben started a group called We Sustain within the trade desk, and it's like sort of, you have to start things sometimes at grassroots and push for leadership to do things. We didn't have to push; they already had things in work, thankfully. But you need people in the business to be engaged. It can't just come from the top, and you know, the measurement side of things that Laura's mentioned is absolutely key, but also just getting people engaged on a more personal level. You know, we went out as a group and did a litter pick along the Thames and things, and it's not going to make a vast difference, but it just gets people engaged, gets a group together. It's a bonding activity that's perhaps more of a gesture than making a real impact, but it gets us together as a team and gets everyone thinking about the subject. And while we're doing it, we're talking about things like AdNet Zero and how we can measure it as a business. We're really sort of brainstorming about the subject, and you know, leadership are heavily engaged, I'm sure, in all of our businesses in this, but we all need to push at different levels and think about this at different levels and contribute at different levels, because that's how you make change happen.
Definitely. Matt, I think you were going to comment as well.
No, it's so funny, you know, Joel, you mentioned your wife and how she works in this space. You know, my wife runs human resources for one of the holding companies. And so, you know, when I said to her, I'll be doing a panel on sustainability, she said, oh, we do all of these programs like the ones you just mentioned. And so, you know, I think when I think about the term, right, it's so broad. And, you know, I think that's perhaps a beauty and perhaps a curse, right? Perhaps, like, you know, I think finding definition here becomes challenging, right? And so, you know, we're in a moment in time where there's very clearly been a roller coaster of a year in 22, right? Our priorities have all been shifting constantly. You start to look at the macroeconomic climate here, the war, supply chain shortages, and you start to say, hey, like, I'm going to shuffle the deck in terms of priorities. And, you know, I think one thing to be really, really cognizant of here is, how does this not become deprioritized, right? Where we talk about the businesses we run, and we all run big businesses, right? I think we can't neglect that. And we want to continue to run them, but we also want to change the way that we do so. And so in thinking about that, you know, how do you build this into the strategy? Not neglect it, because it's one of those things that you kick the can down the road and you think about, hey, like, we've got to hit numbers for the next 90 days and we're going to be laser focused on that. But you have to really start to think about the right now, and, you know, and really sort of build that into the priority set and the planning part, and not just, you know, go, hey, you know, when I think about supply chain and I think about the term efficiency and I think about the cost, you know, and QPS, and, you know, the conversation that Joel and I had once upon a time as, you know, as partners, right? And now, you know, I think that context changes and shifts away from the economics of QPS efficiency back towards, sort of environmental sustainability, right? What is the additional cost that is incurred there? Or how do we start to think about that and drive that as a collaborative conversation so that we're both aligned that if it costs a little bit more, the end goal is actually worth it?
Thanks, Matt. So Phil, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to going back to, I think, the original question, which is about what small changes can we make. I think Joel talked about doing the kind of the picking up the litter, and it was almost like a token gesture. But I think those, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So starting now and doing something now as individuals. This is great that we're sitting around debating it, but making sure that we then go away and we do something and we're not just paying lip service to it is really important. And I think as a large business, but with an office of say around 30 in the UK, we can do the same. We can ensure our office is a little bit more environmentally friendly, that we do the right level of recycling, that we don't leave lights on overnight and air conditioning and so on. But we can also put pressure on our business to look at what they can do as almost as quick wins, I think. So, according to Add Net Zero, the two biggest culprits in the UK of carbon dioxide emissions are 60% travel, I think, of which 60% of that is flights, and then 40% energy. So instantly we can make a difference there. We've ensured in Europe at least that our data centers are run on 100% renewable energy. From a travel perspective, we all work for tech companies. I've worked for US tech companies before, where we fly across the pond a lot. But I think with a lot of offices in Europe, we have around 20 in Europe, there's a lot of, or there was previously a lot of short haul travel that we did, that were flights, that we're now sort of saying, we're coming out of a pandemic, or we've come out of a pandemic. Of course, everyone wants to get on a plane rather than do another Zoom call, but actually let's look at, can we get the train instead of fly? Do we really need to go? Can we combine it, one trip instead of 3 trips? These are things that we can do now to move the dial. And I think that's really important. I think what's missing from our side, and again, we're at the start of the conversation, is that measurement. And I think, working with Add Net Zero to do, to use them to help us do that measurement of what our office is like, is going to be a big part, to have a big role to play.
Thanks, Phil. Definitely. So last question for everyone. Optimism or despair? Phil, I will let you start with this.
Well, I think if you wake up every morning and your biggest competitor is Google, you have to be an optimist to get through the day. But I think let's start with the wins. I think as an industry, looking at sustainability in the supply path, looking at supply path optimization for the commercial benefits, and of course there's kind of economic benefits as well off the back of that, but also I think everybody that's on this call probably works with IAB with regards to things like gold standards. So there are kind of sub levels within that means we really adhere to trying to be transparent and to deliver the best possible experience for consumers. I think that's a big tick. And I think a part of that, as I've said before, is that we also probably have something that's a good solution for the death of the cookie. I think, which means we have a sustainable business in a few years outside of the walled gardens. I think in terms of the carbon neutrality, it sounds like we are all at different stages. But I think as Laura has said, as long as we've got someone senior that's with us in our organization that's willing to, that's got the buy-in and willing to see this as something for investors, something for, I think I've seen more and more RFPs or RFIs land where people are asking this as, not just item 10 out of 10, but actually 3 or 4. And also in terms of hiring people, in terms of hiring younger people from more diverse backgrounds into the industry, this is something that they deeply care about. And, I think we have to start now, and we have to get better at it, but at least let's start now.
Thanks, Phil. Matt, over to you, short and sweet, because I think we only have a minute left.
Well, if I answer despair, then they're going to make me swim home back to New York. So the answer very clearly is optimism. But, I think I can't say that I'm optimistic across the industry. And so, personally, I'm optimistic, but I think there are going to be some tough times ahead for some companies that perhaps may not understand what this all means and, bigger picture, how this fits into their future with the partners who value this differently. So I think for now, personally super optimistic, and I think we are just getting started, and so there's a long way to go. But if we're all collaborative and we're all aligned here, then I think we can get there.
Yeah. Joel, you won't have to swim home, at least.
No, thankfully. I mean, I live south of the river, so a little swim. But yeah, optimism as well. Bid duplication removal and the efficiencies of SPO as our industry are a huge step. But also, I think everyone on this call is their businesses are a member of AdNet Zero, which is huge and probably has changed in the last year. You've got the emergence of companies like Goodloop and Scope 3, and they're all pushing us to go in the right direction. And something Phil said is true here as well. We see a number of advertisers who are looking at pointing their budgets at either sites that promote sustainability as a subject or sites that are run sustainably, and that wasn't happening 2 years ago. And I think these are all really important steps, as well as everything everyone else has said. I think we're all going in the right direction.
Thanks, Phil. Laura?
I'm going to steal an environmentalist Joanna Macy's definition, active hope. And I think the reason it has to be active hope is that we all need to play our part. We can't sit on our laurels and hope that this is going to get sorted. We've all got to lean in and be active in this space and champion it. The small things to the big things. We need radical transformation within the next 24 months if we want to stay on target for a net zero society, which we desperately need to do. So yeah, active hope.
Yeah. I like that, active hope. Thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Lauren, I'm gonna hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you, Joel, Matt, Laura and Phil for your insights there. Super important conversation for us all to be having and to continue to have and to start turning into actual action. Next up, we have got our technical director joining us, Alexandra, who is going to talk us through the recent upcoming standards, releases and revisions that are available to support trust and transparency in our industry. Alex, I can see you're there, so I will hand over straight to you.
Thank you, Lauren. So let me share my screen. Okay, so because I have a lot of screen, wait. Okay. So I guess now it's okay, right?
Yes, it's great. We can see your screen. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So thank you, Lauren, for having me. So yes, I'm Alexander Agakura, Technical Director at IAB Europe. And following the debate on supply chain and transparency, I'm going to present you the latest new standard to drive trust and transparency in our industry. So the agenda today, I'm going to talk about at-stake. I'm going to talk about the new update. I'm going to talk about OpenRTB 2.6, the new one, Open Measurement SDK, and then I will talk about TCF. So especially about the technical specification update, okay? So everything around transparency in the supply chain. So let's talk about at-stake 1.1. Just a background about that. It was introduced in 2017, okay, authorized digital sellers to reduce fraud, misrepresentation, domain spoofing, and unauthorized sale of ad inventory. With the later creation, additional disclosure of seller has further transparency through routes to the supply chain. So in addition, we have sellers.json, public and accessible file published by SSP or Exchange to enable buyers to identify the final sellers, okay, identify to discover the entities and so on, if it's direct or intermediaries. And then you have the supply chain object, a set of nodes where each node represents a specific entity that participate in the transacting of inventory. And then together, sellers.json and supply chain object are the mechanism to identify all intermediaries, okay, that participate in the money flow. And then today, there is a new at-stake 1.1 released in August last month, and the idea is to add owner domain and manager domain variable. So regarding this new update, let's go back in the previous specification at TXT 1.0.3. So inventory partner domain is a pointer to the domain of an entity that is explicitly authorized to monetize ads within the application content, which means, for example, you have a publisher, dev site with app at TXT, okay? And then you have, they declare their SSP, and then you have inventory partner domain, okay? In this case, the partner domain will be programmer A, okay? I will explain, okay, no worry, in the slide and the slide after. So regarding the two new fields in this version at TXT 1.1 released in the last month, you have owner domain now. So it specified the domain of the business that owns the website that the ad is being served on, and the other new field is manager domain. When the owner of the site does not manage monetization either globally or in specific country, the domain listed in manager domain is in charge of the monetization. So for example, you have the owner domain, which is mediacompany.com, okay? And then you have, for example, in this scenario, two manager domain per country, you see? So yellow mediamanager.com for France, for monetization. And then you have blue mediamanager.com for the US, USA, okay? This is very helpful in this scenario because it exists, okay? Following that, there are, of course, the use cases. So the use of manager domain versus inventory partner domain. So in this scenario, manager domain is used to represent a primary or exclusive programmatic seller of a publisher inventory and signify when a manager is the most direct path to the publisher inventory. And then you have inventory partner domain is used to represent companies that owns or has the right to sell a portion of ad on the underlying app where they are listed, okay? During the last months and years, there was a big focus, especially on CTV, okay, to manage those cases. And the two new ad 6 fields, owner domain and manager domain again. So owner domain helps to connect the seller domain for publisher entries in sellers.json file, okay? And then manager domain helps to level the supply path optimization by linking apps TXT directly to the sellers.json. So this is about TXT update, the new version, okay? And now let's talk about OpenRTB 2.6 with the new update. So background. So of course, OpenRTB, is a communication protocol that enables RTB, real-time building, to help the industry in programmatic between buyers and sellers, of course. OpenRTB 2.6 was released in April 2022, okay? And before that, the previous version, OpenRTB 2.5 was released in December 2016. However, some of you already know that, but OpenRTB 3.0 exists since November 2018. But in fact, just a few are using it because, in fact, there is a delay in adoption, okay? Because programmatic industry still relies on 2.5 spec for many reasons, resources, development, etc., adoption rate. And the hope is this 2.6 version as a step towards industry adoption for the 3.0 standard, of course. So let's talk about the update. So first one, impression counting with billing notice barrier. So the idea is really the best alignment between DSPs and exchange to contract ads, because just to be short, you have the DSP sending the ads with URL of counting. And the idea of this barrier is a new version in order to count at the same time with the SSP, okay? So to better align and to decrease, to have just a small discrepancy between sell side and buy side. Taxonomy. Before that, only IAB's content category taxonomy could be used. For example, SSP was able, currently, in fact, SSP is able to categorize the inventory. For example, if the publisher, if the domain is talking about car or something like that, the SSP can add the category of to identify this domain as a core, But it was based on one taxonomy. Today, there is a new field named cat tax, and it allows the use of different taxonomy, okay? For example, ad product, ad audience, content, in the bid request, and also in the bid response. So this is an improvement, really interesting for sellers, but also for buyers, for the ad. Also, user agent information. Via browser agent, the user agent string provides a lot of information. You see, enough clause to identify the user. You have the browser, you have the desk, you have you can either if it's desktop, etc., etc. And the new user agent client enforce a mode, enable access to the same information, but in a more privacy preserving way. So now OpenRTB 2.6 now support user agent client ints. So this is really nice. Now let's talk about the update, but only focus on audio and video. And there is a lot of things to say about that. First of all, pod bidding for video and audio content stream. Basically, an ad pod describes an ad break. Basically, an ad pod typically contains one or more in-stream creative assets that play out contiguously within a stream content. But you have different ad podding features: structured, dynamic, and hybrid. Just to talk about that, I'm going to take one example for the structured ad pod. For example, you have this one ad pod, and you have different slots. You see slot 1, slot 2, etc., etc. And following, if it's dynamic or hybrid, for example, you can see only two slots with slot 60 seconds, 60 seconds, or hybrid, making the difference between the time, etc., etc. Different scenario. Always about audio and video. Still about that, network versus channel. Prior to the release of OpenRTB 2.6, it was really difficult for buyers to identify the content in which they are placing their ad in the context of CTV, for example. Now, buyers can get the name of the TV, a network, and exact channel name in a human-readable format. So, for example, a user viewing content on an internet-connected device on a device offered channel. In this scenario, you have Roku, Fubo, Comedy Central show. In this scenario, Roku is a device, Fubo TV is a network, also identified by the bundle ID, and then Comedy Central is a channel, you see? So it's really always talking about transparency, and this is really helpful for that. Then for SSI, server-side insertion, there is a new field to indicate this type, okay? Whether creative assets teaching and becoming happen from the client side or server side. And then there are two new fields in the video response. Interesting, DUR, which is the duration of the video or audio creative in seconds, and M type, which is a type of creative, if it's a banner, video, audio, and native. And then let's talk about the future of OpenRTB in the next release. So currently, OpenRTB programmatic is evolving, okay, very fast, and the idea is with IAB Tech Lab to get extensions features faster, be more agile, take account the era, because, for example, in European we have, for example, we have TCF and other restriction we need to apply in our ecosystem, but for example, in the US you have other. So the idea is really to be fast per area. Of course, OpenRTB compatibility, because according to each area, most of the company are compliant with OpenRTB 2.x, other one with 2.5, etc. Of course, it's based on the ad tech platform, okay, worldwide. But sometimes, you have some disparity, per area. Get shorter timelines for the development. Yes, the idea is really to avoid impacting the programmatic ecosystem. And the last one is privacy focus, of course. Make sure to be aligned with the privacy regulation, California rules, TCF, etc., etc. Identify the data point to avoid any data leak, for example, and guidelines, of course, in order to help the industry to evolve. Now let's talk about Open Measurement SDK. It will be quick. IAB Open Measurement SDK to measure data, okay, to facilitate third-party access to measure data, okay. So now Open Measurement SDK 1.4 was released in June, okay, and now supports CTV. 4 points. First one, identify CTV traffic, okay. New property has been added to understand if an integration has a compliant for given environment, CTV mobile. Second one, last activity, this new appear for signing if someone is still watching the content or if the device was left on. Third one, display connection status, a new value to understand when the TV display is off, okay, but application may still be running. And the last one, video pod measurement, a new native API in order to measure video ad pods with gapless playback for JavaScript session type. So now let's talk about the last one, the TCF technical specification update. So it's about the specification vendor device storage and operational disclosure, okay? So the device storage JSON, you already may have heard about that before, was first introduced, in 2020, okay, as an optional field. It followed the Planet 49 ruling, okay, which established a requirement to disclose the duration of cookies to obtain valid consent under the e-privacy directives. The file enabled vendors to provide additional details, okay, on the different cookies they may use and associated duration. The second part is to provide additional transparency and interoperability between TCF participants. This file have been revamped, okay, and is now mandatory as per notification sent in March, okay. So, and the last part is this JSON contains two types of information. The first part, called the disclosure area, is intended for user disclosure, as more and more data protection authorities recommend to provide the list of cookies susceptible to be placed on user device, their purposes, and association duration. The second one, a part called the domain array, okay, is not intended for user disclosure, but aims to support TCF participants on technical and organizational measurement at company level, okay, to monitor and ensure compliance of their technical integration with vendor partners, okay. So both are required. So not all information within each array is required, of course. Everything is explained in our specification. And the new deadline is September 30th. Last slide is around the JSON file itself, okay? So the vendor publishes information and provide the URL to the TCF during the registration process. This file is in JSON format, is created, named, and published by the vendor. So we don't ask it anything. So it's really created, named, and published by the vendor, publicly accessible, and contain cookies or other storage mechanism, and domain used for collecting and processing personal data in the context of the TCF. In addition, with the GitHub spec, technical spec, we added a FAQ, and this one is now available. The document addresses questions, including the use of domain instead of domain field, the use of wildcard, when the storage mechanism is set by a first party set, I'm sorry, not first party set, because I was thinking about the privacy sandbox, I'm sorry, but set by a first party and so on. And of course, as we are still communicating with the vendor, and sometimes the vendor have some question sometimes, the document will be and is updated over the time. Thank you, and I hope it was not too long, Lauren.
Thank you so much. It was great to have you join us and to run us through that to kind of finalize our event, because we are now actually at the end of our event today, and we're very delighted that you were all able to join us. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, and hope you found it as valuable as we did. I'd like to thank all of our panelists and moderators for giving up their time and sharing their knowledge and views on the important topics that we discussed and debated today. Don't forget that IAB Europe is actually going to be hosting more in the series as we go through the month of September. So we have a number of fantastic industry insiders coming up as part of the series. We've got them coming up with companies such as Adform, Verve Group, LiveRamp, and also Google. So keep your eyes out for those and do sign up. It's all free to attend. We've already also had a couple of events in the series already, including industry insiders from Meta and OneTrust. So do head over to our Knowledge Hub, as we'll be kind of continually sharing the recordings on those events there, so you can rewatch and dive into those sessions. So yes, finally, thank you all for turning up today and taking your time out of your day to watch the content and join the sessions. As I think we mentioned earlier in the event, we have recorded this all today, so we'll be sharing the recordings in the next sort of few days, so keep an eye out for that as well. At the beginning of the event, we also mentioned that speakers are from IAB Europe member companies, so if you're keen to become a member and or participate in any of our upcoming events, please just let myself or any of the members of the IAB team know. We'd be happy to help you. But with that, thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.